Our next speaker is Tony Buettner. I don't know, there's Tony. He's the senior leader at Bluezones and brother to the founder, Dan Buettner. He says that in the 9 blue zones discovered worldwide, men live to 100 and beyond at 10 times the rate of men living in America. So I think we have a lot to learn from Tony. He's going to reveal some of the secrets of longevity of the blue zone areas of the world. Please, Tony.
I tell you, I looked at that, the schedule, and I said, why do I have to follow sex? Wow. I will tell you this. We talked to 263 centenarians in 5 areas around the world, and the majority of them still have sex. So I'll start off with that. So I've sat here this morning. I'm just in awe with the brilliant people here. I'm not a medical researcher or expert. When most people are going to college to get their degrees, going to their PhDs, we went on bicycle rides, myself and my 3 brothers. Our first bicycle ride was from Prudhoe Bay to Tierra del Fuego, Argentina. For all of you that have looked at a globe, though, it's really not that big a deal. If you look at it, it's really all downhill. Just a real long hill. Our second trip was from Minneapolis to St. Paul, the long way, about 11 months, 13,000 miles. And our third trip was from the northern tip of Africa to the southern tip. It was these expeditions that caught the eyes of National Geographic, and they called my brother Dan and asked him, would you be interested in exploring the longest lived populations and try to figure out why they live so long? So something called the Danish Twin Studies has established that our longevity, and I saw it earlier today, is only tied to 20% of our genes. 80% of how long we live is tied to our environments and our lifestyles. So the premise for us when we started this work, if we could find the right environments and the right lifestyles that support longevity, we might have the de facto recipe for longevity. What our approach was to look for demographic clusters within geographically defined areas where people simply live longer, better lives, and to embed ourselves there to figure out why. In these blue zones, people live on average 10 years longer than we do, with just a fraction of the chronic disease that we suffer here in America. After 15 years of research, we've found 5 areas. The first one is here on the island of Sardinia, about 150 miles off the coast of Italy. It is here you find the longest lived men. They live 10 years longer than we do here in America. On average, you'll find 4 centenarian women to 1 man here in Sardinia. It's actually 1 to 1. So what do we find here? We find a culture that lives primarily on a plant-based diet. They do eat some animal protein. It's only about 5% of the time. It's usually a celebratory event. And portion size is very important, about the size of a deck of cards. So you see them eating things like maybe some chicken, some goat, and they do eat some pork. And I can tell you, when they get their hands on it, they get pretty happy. We found many people drinking red wine in Sardinia. We had this wine tested. It actually has 3 times the polyphenols, artery-scrubbing compounds, of any other wine in the world. And I can tell you, after many Friday nights, it tastes really good too. Connie now. What amazed us here, though, is how they set up their society. As you get older, you are more revered. You are not put into retirement homes. You're actually cared for by your kids. And we know that this affords an additional 4 to 6 years of extra longevity. We also found what's called the grandmother effect. The children of these extended families suffer lower rates of infant mortality and disease. This is a culture where you see 103-year-old men biking to work with a cigar in their mouth, chopping wood, and beating a man 65 years younger than them in an arm wrestling tournament. Now, I don't know how many of you had an older brother. Mine kind of picked on me when I was a kid. What I love about my job now is I get to travel the world and watch him, Dan Buettner, founder and CEO, get beat by a man 65 years old in an arm wrestling tournament. Our second blue zone was here, and this is really ground zero for longevity on the archipelago of Okinawa. This is where you find the longest lived women. They live 12 good years longer than we do here in America. They have the longest disability life expectancy in the world. They, as a culture, live 7 years longer than we do, 5 times as many centenarians, just 1/5 the rate of breast and colon cancer, and 1/6 the rate of cardiovascular disease. So what do we find here? Again, we find a population eating a plant-based diet. We saw some fruits and vegetables we knew, others we had really no clue. They eat 7 times as much tofu as we do here in America. We see a culture that thoughtfully reverses stress through downshifting, and they do it through what's called ancestor veneration, where they simply stop for 20 minutes and remember the people that came before them. We also see this concept of committed social networks. 30 years ago, the average American had 3 best friends they could count on a good day and a bad day. Today, that's down to 1.5. We're becoming this isolated population. In Okinawa, they have these things called moais. They're formed very shortly after birth. You travel through life together, supporting each other in good times and bad. These women have been in this moai for 97 years. Talk about a support system. Here in America, our second most dangerous year of life is the year we retire. In Okinawa, they don't even have a term for it. But what we do here is this term ikigai, which means the reason we get up in the morning. And we know people with that mission statement live 7 years longer than those that don't. We found America's blue zone in a very strange place amongst the Seventh-day Adventists in Loma Linda, California. This is a population of about 25,000 people. They have the same challenges we have here in any other city in America, but they live 10 years longer than we do. So what's happening here? Well, we find a culture, actually a cultural melting pot that takes their diet from the Bible. Chapter 1, verses 27 from 29. So they're supporting healthy eating. We see, again, a population that downshifts. They do it through what's called a 24-hour sanctuary of time. From sunset on Friday to sunset on Saturday, they stop everything. They focus on 3 things: family, friends, and faith. They take nature walks, so you see people moving naturally. And you see on this time off what I call a moai. What they're doing is they're eating plant-based potlucks. They're supporting each other, and we know the supported network has a profound effect on this population. This population has given us a 106-year-old active cowboy, Mr. Ed Rawlings. He starts his day with a swim, and like a good Minnesotan kid like myself, he still puts on the boards on the weekend. This is a culture that has given us a 104-year-old Marge Deton. Now get this, Marge starts her day with a prune juice shooter. I wonder what that does to your brain. Our fourth blue zone was here on the Nicoya Peninsula. This is where a whole population has 3 times a better chance of living to a healthy age 90. But what we start to see by this time are commonalities. We see these populations moving naturally. They have the right outlook. They eat wisely, and they're very well connected. We stumbled into our last blue zones here, the island of Nicoya. This is an extraordinary place. 8,000 people live on the island. There's almost no dementia or no chronic disease. 8,000 people. So what is this population doing? Well, we see them moving naturally, eating a plant-based diet. They have some faith. They downshift. I was at a wedding there, and at 3 in the morning was dancing with a 97-year-old man and a 93-year-old man. It's extraordinary, the social connectedness there. But what was different there were these. We found over 150 herbs and spices that grow wild on the island of Nicoya. And they do everything with them. I don't know about the sex part. I know they cook with them. They make drinks with them. They infuse teas and honey. And early research is pointing to a connection between these herbs and these spices and the lack of dementia. Dan wrote an article for National Geographic. To date, it's the second most edition in their 129-year history. People want to learn how to live longer, better lives. We found what we call the Power Nine. These are commonalities we found over and over and over again. The first is these populations move naturally. They are not sedentary. On average, they're moving every 20 minutes. They're either gardening, they live in deconvenience homes, they bike, they walk, but they're active. They're calling the 9-to-5 job and sitting all day the new cancer of our generation. They had the right outlook. They had strategies to downshift and reverse stress, the inflammation that is connected with most preventable diseases. They did it through yoga or meditation or having dinner with their families. Or like the Sardinians, they just went to happy hour and drank some of that Continental wine. These populations had a sense of purpose and could articulate it. A mission statement. Why am I getting up in the morning? And we know that adds an additional 7 years of longevity. And then these populations ate wisely. They drank a little bit of wine, typically wine, some alcohol. For women, it was about 2/3 of a glass. For men, just shy of 2 glasses a day. And I know what you're thinking out there. Can I save up and have 14 on Friday? No. They ate primarily a plant-based diet. They had strategies to not to overeat. Simple things like eating off of smaller plates, pre-plating food in the kitchen and putting leftovers away, or eating like a king for breakfast, a prince for lunch, and a pauper for dinner. And then lastly, they were connected. They put family first. We talked to 263 centenarians. Only 3 did not belong to a faith-based community, and we understand faith has many faces. But those people that show up 4 times a month live 4 to 14 years longer than those that don't. And lastly, who did they hang out with? We know social networks are so contagious. If your 3 best friends smoke, you have a 160% greater chance. It's the same with loneliness, depression, obesity, but imagine if these behaviors are positive, how they flow through a social network. So this is great. We learned all this great stuff. Could we just go out and tell people how to be healthier? No, people don't listen. Things like diets, gyms, supplements, they don't work. The recidivism curve is too steep. With a grant from National Geographic, we were asked to create a population health strategy that would work here in America. We started off with what was called the life radius concept, knowing that people spend 90% of their time in a 5-mile radius of where they live and where they work. So what we simply do is take the focus off of individuals and we look at how we can change the environment and lifestyles within this life radius. We start with people's homes. How can we help people optimize their home? Do you know we make about 200 health-minded decisions a day? You're probably standing in that line today thinking, what am I going to eat healthy for lunch? What was nice about that is everything there was healthy. It made the healthy choice the easy choice. So what we do at Bluezones is how can we help people with their homes make the healthy choice the easy choice? And how about social networks? How can we help people create their own moais, healthy moais around walking and eating, finding purpose? And how about purpose workshops? Is there any way to help people figure out what they're good at and what they like to do and help them formulate their mission statement and put that work, those gifts to volunteering? Secondly, we looked at those places where we live, work, and play. How could we change the grocery stores where people go shopping? How about employers, work sites, and restaurants, schools our kids go to? Or how about our faith-based community, again, to change that environment, to subtly nudge people into healthier choices? And then how can we work with city leaders around food policy, How about tobacco policy in the built environment, again, to make healthier choices easier? Well, people told us we were crazy, this would never work. We got a grant from AARP and the United Health Foundation to replicate a blue zone here in America. We chose a city by the name of Albert Lea. We brought in experts. We sat down with the city leaders around policy. We helped them change green spaces to places where they could have gardens. We brought in Brian Wansick to change environments within the restaurants. We worked with grocery stores to label healthy foods, create healthy checkout lanes. We worked with schools to provide policies for them to implement. One as simple as this. How many of you walked to school when you were in school? Raise your hand. About 85%. Now raise your hand if your children or grandchildren walk to school. Raise your hand. 30 years ago, 54% of kids walked to school. Today it's down to 11%. The problem is it's safer to walk to school now. So how can you help with safe routes to schools and walking school buses? We created Moais to people that had never met each other. They walked for 10 weeks, 35 million miles, and lost 17,000 pounds. We worked with employers. We had a humongous kickoff event, and after 13 months, we measured our results, and they were astounding. City workers' healthcare claims down. Tobacco usage in the county down. People walking more, eating better, gaining grants for their built environment work to make healthier choices easier. We had Walter Willett come in 2 years later and called the results stunning. He simply said, "This is stunning because this wasn't last month's fun run or diet exercise. These were permanent and semi-permanent changes made to environments and lifestyles that will last." 5 years later, we're now in 9 states and 31 communities. We're helping the state of Iowa, Hawaii, and Oregon transform the well-being there. I want to be honest here. And we look at it today and we listen. We have a health epidemic going on. 68% people in America are obese or overweight. Diabetes is skyrocketing. For the first time in human history, it's projected that our children will live less long lives. We can't get in our cars anymore or leave our homes with thinking we got to get in our car and go. We can't bike or walk, can we? We can. When we do get in that car, we run a gauntlet of fast food restaurants, sugar-sweetened beverages, salty snacks. As we're learning today, the brain is a muscle, and muscles fatigue. The work we're doing at Bluezones is providing individuals, organizations, families, and even communities make the healthy choice the easy choice. I'd like to leave you with this gentleman right here. It's my favorite. So this is Stamanites. We met him on our first trip to Ikaria. And what was interesting about him is that he had moved to America at a young age. He had gotten a family, became a painter, was living a great life until he had shortness of breath. He ended up going to his doctor, and they told him he had stage 4 lung cancer. He went to 5 other doctors. They all said, "You have 6 months to live." Instead of just going on painkillers and medicine and chemo, he actually moved back to Ikaria. He said, "If I'm going to die, I'm going to die back on the island." He moved back, just settled back into Icarian life, and actually got better. Dan was actually writing an article about him in the New York Times about 8 months ago. It's called "The Island That Forgot to Die." And he asked me to call Stamanites and ask him something. So I got on the phone with him, and I said, "Stamanites, can you tell me why you think you were cured of stage 4 lung cancer?" He said, "Tony, I have no idea." He says, "I tell you what, though, about 10 years ago, I was back in the States, and I went to see them doctors to see what they thought." I said, "Well, what'd they say?" He goes, "Nothing. They're all dead." Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.